When Sarah's husband, Mark, left her for his ambitious colleague, Jessica, just weeks before their daughter was born, he thought he was free. He believed he'd escaped the burden of a simple life for one filled with power and prestige. 20 years later, their paths would intertwine again, in a way neither could have predicted. But could a mother's enduring love bridge the chasm of betrayal and abandonment? Sarah traced the outline of her swollen belly, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. She was humming a lullaby when Mark walked in, his face a mask of cold resolve. "I want a divorce," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. The tiny baby sock she was knitting slipped from her trembling fingers. "Mark, what? What are you saying?" she whispered, her heart seizing in her chest. "I've found someone else," he replied, turning to stare out the window. "Someone who understands my vision, who can support the kind of life I'm building. You need to leave tonight." Her world spun. Sarah pressed her hands to her belly, feeling their unborn daughter kick as if sensing the impending storm. "Mark, please, I'm carrying your child. We promised each other. That child will be better off without the limitations your background would place on her," he interrupted, finally meeting her eyes, though they were distant and unseeing. "Jessica is educated, sophisticated. She can give me the kind of children who will truly make something of themselves." His words were a cruel, calculated blow. Sarah sank to her knees, clutching his trouser leg. "Please, Mark, for our baby's sake, I'll change. I'll learn. Pack your things. I want you gone in an hour." How had it come to this? Just 5 years ago, Mark had been a struggling junior architect, sketching designs on napkins in the small cafe where Sarah worked. He had admired her quiet strength, walked her home through the bustling city streets, held her hand, and promised they would build something beautiful together. "We're both starting from nothing," he had said on those hopeful evenings. "But together, we can rise above it all." Sarah had believed him. She had believed in his dreams when he was just a hopeful man with big ambitions. She had encouraged him through every promotion, celebrated every success, and now that he was a rising star with a corner office and expensive suits, he was casting her aside like trash. That night, Sarah found herself on the cold city streets with nothing but a small bag and the clothes on her back. Her belly ached, and she felt their daughter moving restlessly, as if she, too, sensed their desperate situation. An orphan, Sarah had nowhere to go. She walked until her swollen feet could carry her no further, finally finding shelter in a dusty, abandoned warehouse. The concrete floor was cold against her back as she cried until no more tears would come. But as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and emerging gold, Sarah placed both hands on her belly and made a solemn promise. "I will not let you suffer for your father's choices," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "I will be strong enough for both of us." The next morning, despite her exhaustion, Sarah began her search for work. Door after door slammed in her face when potential employers saw her advanced pregnancy. But as the sun began to set, she encountered Mrs. Davies, an older woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, selling fresh produce from a small stand outside the market. "Child, you look ready to collapse," Mrs. Davies said, studying Sarah's pale, drawn face. "When was the last time you ate?" Sarah's pride wavered with her desperation. I'm looking for work, ma'am. I can sell anything, clean anything." "Sit down before you fall down," Mrs. Davies commanded gently. She pressed a ripe apple into Sarah's hands. "Eat this first, then we talk." As Sarah devoured the fruit, Mrs. Davies listened to her story with growing anger at Mark's cruelty and burgeoning admiration for Sarah's fierce determination. "You can sell for me," the old woman decided. "Take this basket of fruits. Sell them in the office area near the park. Whatever money you make after returning my capital, you keep." For the next 3 months, Sarah hawked fruits with a resilience that impressed even the city's hardened street vendors. Her belly grew larger, making the work harder, but she pressed on. Mrs. Davies watched this young woman struggle with growing fondness. "Come and stay with me," She offered one evening as Sarah counted the day's meager earnings. "My room is small, but it's better than that old warehouse where you've been sleeping." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Why are you helping me, ma'am?" Mrs. Davies' weathered face softened. "Because 40 years ago, my husband and his family threw me out when I couldn't have children. No one helped me then. You remind me that kindness still exists in this world." The two women, separated by age but united by hardship, became family. On a cold, rainy Tuesday night in December, Sarah's labor pains began. With no money for a hospital, Mrs. Davies became midwife, boiling water and tearing clean cloths as Sarah gripped her hands and pushed their daughter into the world. "She's beautiful," Mrs. Davies whispered, placing the crying baby on Sarah's chest. "What will you call her?" "Hope," Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her daughter's perfect features. "Because she is my hope. She will do great things, ma'am. Great things." Life with a newborn tested Sarah's limits daily. She had to leave 6-week-old Hope with Mrs. Davies while she sold fruits, rushing back every few hours to nurse her. When Hope was old enough to be carried, Sarah strapped her to her back and continued working, Hope's cheerful gurgles becoming the soundtrack to her hustle. But when Hope turned 1, everything changed. She developed a high fever that wouldn't break, followed by violent convulsions that terrified both women. At the city hospital, the doctor's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "It's meningitis. She needs immediate treatment. Antibiotics, monitoring, possible surgery. The cost will be $15,000. Sarah had saved $7,500 for Hope's future education. It wasn't enough. She fell to her knees in the hospital corridor, sobbing as Mrs. Davies held her trembling shoulders. "Take my savings," the old woman said firmly. "All of it. That girl is my granddaughter, too." Between them, they had just enough. Hope survived, but the experience changed Sarah forever. That night, she vowed never again would she be helpless when her child needed her. As Hope slowly recovered, Sarah continued hawking fruit while taking on any work she could find, washing clothes, sweeping streets, carrying heavy loads. Sarah wanted to save enough money to start her own business. One scorching afternoon, while selling oranges near a construction site, she overheard workers complaining about the terrible food from local vendors. Her heart pounding with nervous courage, Sarah approached the site supervisor, a burly man named Mr. Thompson. "Sir, excuse me, what if I could provide hot, delicious meals for your workers at a fair price? I guarantee quality and good taste." Mr. Thompson looked skeptical, but something in Sarah's confident tone made him pause. You want to cook for 50 hungry men? Give me one chance, sir. If they don't love the food, you don't pay me." The next day, Sarah arrived with pots of savory stews, fresh bread, and grilled chicken that made the entire site smell like heaven. The workers devoured every last bite and begged to know when she'd return. Word spread like wildfire. Within 2 months, Sarah had contracts with 3 construction sites. She hired 2 other women and rented a small space to operate from. Finally, she could afford a proper room for herself and Hope. Young Hope watched her mother's transformation with pride and amazement. At age 5, she helped serve food after school, learning to count money and treat customers with respect. She saw how her mother gave free meals to homeless children and never turned away anyone who was hungry. "Mama, why do you feed people who can't pay?" she asked one evening as they walked home. "Because, my daughter, we were once hungry too. Success means lifting others up, not stepping on them to climb higher." Hope never heard her mother speak badly of her father. When she asked about the man who had given her life, Sarah would simply say, "Your daddy made different choices, but you, Hope, you will make better ones." By age 10, Hope was the brightest student in her class at the local primary school. By secondary school, she had earned a full scholarship to one of the city's best private academies. Her teachers marveled at her focus, her kindness to classmates, and her determination to make her mother proud. Sarah's business continued to grow. Her reputation for clean, delicious food spread throughout their neighborhood. She saved every dollar she could. By Hope's final year in secondary school, she had bought a small plot of land and built a proper restaurant. Sarah's kitchen became known across the city for its authentic home cooking and warm atmosphere. Mrs. Davies, now in her late 70s, watched their success with tears of joy. Sarah had moved her into their beautiful house and opened a small produce store in her name. But the old woman preferred to spend her days at the restaurant, telling stories to customers and spoiling Hope like the grandmother she'd never had. But while their lives flourished elsewhere in the city, Mark Reynolds' world was crumbling. His marriage to Jessica had been everything he dreamed. A lavish wedding, connections to powerful families, a lifestyle that impressed his colleagues. But Jessica was not the innocent colleague she had appeared to be. She was calculating, ambitious, and when she caught the attention of Mr. Peterson, a wealthy real estate executive 15 years her senior, but worth millions, she saw a much bigger prize than a mere architect. Jessica's plan was ruthless in its simplicity. She secretly gathered evidence of Mark's embezzlement, money he'd stolen to fund their extravagant lifestyle, then secretly reported him to the Financial Crimes Unit while simultaneously disappearing with the remainder of his stolen funds amid the chaos. Mark, blinded by lust and ego, never suspected the woman he thought worshipped him was actually planning his destruction. The raid happened on a Tuesday morning. Mark was arrested in front of his entire staff, including the junior architects he had once humiliated. The evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. In his small, hot cell, Mark had nothing but time to think about his choices. He thought about Sarah's gentle hands, her encouraging words, the way she used to wait up for him no matter how late he came home. He thought about the child he had never met, the child he had thrown away in his pursuit of an empty dream. Meanwhile, Hope graduated from university with first-class honors in business administration. At 20, she landed a position with one of the nation's most prestigious consulting firms. Sarah cried tears of joy at her graduation ceremony, remembering the nights she had studied with Hope by candlelight, helping with her homework while managing her growing business. "Mama, everything I owe to you," Hope said, placing her graduation certificate in her mother's hands. "You never let me feel like I was missing anything, even though I was missing a father." Sarah kissed her forehead, her heart full to bursting. "You were never missing anything important, my daughter. Love is what matters. Love and determination." When Mark was released from prison after serving his full sentence, he was 50 years old and looked 70. 8 years of regret had aged him terribly. With no money, no home, and a criminal record that made employment impossible, he found himself sleeping on the city streets, begging for change from strangers who looked through him as if he were invisible. One sweltering Thursday afternoon, Hope was leaving her office when she noticed an elderly beggar sitting against a building wall. Something about the man's posture touched her heart. The beggar looked defeated in a way that reminded Hope of her own struggles growing up. "Sir," Hope called out, approaching the man. "Are you hungry?" The beggar looked up with eyes that had once held ambition but now held only shame. "Please, anything you can spare?" "Come with me," Hope said gently. "Let me buy you a proper meal." She led the man to Sarah's kitchen, not recognizing the figure hunched beside her as the father who had abandoned her before birth. As they entered the bustling restaurant, Sarah looked up from the cash register and froze. Time seemed to stop as she stared at the broken man beside her successful daughter. 20 years fell away, and she was once again the pregnant girl begging for mercy on a cold, lonely night. "Mark," she whispered. Hope's head snapped toward her mother, then back to the beggar. Her eyes widened with recognition and rage. You're my father?" Mark's voice cracked as he realized who the young woman was. "Sarah, is this my daughter?" "Don't call me your daughter." Hope's voice shook with years of suppressed anger. "You threw us away. You left my mother pregnant and alone on the streets. Please, I never want to see you again." Hope stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Mark collapsed in shame and Sarah staring after her daughter with tears in her eyes. Later that evening, Sarah found Mark still sitting outside her restaurant. She brought him a plate of food and sat beside him on the concrete steps. "I'm sorry," Mark whispered, unable to look at her. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I threw away everything real for things that meant nothing. I see what you've built, what you've raised. I don't deserve forgiveness." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching city traffic stream past them. "I forgave you years ago, Mark. Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would have poisoned everything good in my life. And hope. Hope is hurt. She's carried the weight of your abandonment her whole life, even though I tried to shield her from it. Give her time." That night, Sarah and Mrs. Davies sat Hope down in their comfortable living room. "My daughter," Sarah said gently, "anger is a heavy burden to carry. I know you're hurt, but holding on to that hurt will only make you bitter. He doesn't deserve forgiveness, Mama. Look what he did to you. And look what we built despite what he did," Mrs. Davies added, her voice filled with wisdom. "You are successful. Your mother is successful. We are a family. His mistakes don't have the power to hurt us anymore unless we let them." It took Hope 3 days of wrestling with her emotions before she went looking for Mark. She found him in the same spot where they'd first met, looking even more defeated than before. "I've decided to forgive you," Hope said without preamble. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let your choices continue to affect my life." Mark looked up with desperate hope. "Does that mean?" "It means I forgive you. But I'm 20 years old. I've passed the stage where I needed a father. You can't undo 20 years of absence with an apology." Hope pulled out a business card and handed it to Mark. "This is a rehabilitation center that helps former inmates reintegrate into society. If you truly want to change your life, start there. Earn your redemption through your actions, not your words." 5 years later, Sarah's kitchen was packed for its usual Sunday family dinner. Hope, now a successful consultant with her own firm, sat at the large table with her husband, Ben, and their young son. Sarah, now a respected businesswoman with 3 restaurants across the city, served plates piled high with her signature dishes. Mrs. Davies, in her 80s but still sharp, told stories that made the children giggle. Mark was not at the table. He had successfully completed the rehabilitation program and found work as a security guard at a small company. He lived quietly, sending occasional letters to Hope that were polite but distant. The relationship they would never have was a wound that had healed over but left a scar. But as Sarah looked around her table at the family she had built through love, determination, and forgiveness, she knew that some stories don't end with perfect reconciliation. Sometimes the happy ending is simply the love that survives, the dreams that come true despite the obstacles, and the knowledge that you've raised a daughter who understands that true strength comes not from abandoning others, but from lifting them up. "Mama," Hope said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Thank you for showing me that a person's worth isn't measured by where they come from, but by how they choose to love." Sarah smiled, her heart full of the kind of wealth that can never be stolen or lost. Outside, the city bustled with its eternal energy. But inside Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the family who had chosen her, she knew she had everything that truly mattered. The strength of a mother's heart, she had learned, could overcome any betrayal, survive any hardship, and build any dream. And that was the greatest lesson she could give her daughter. Not just the ability to forgive, but the power to love without limits,